Welcome to Around the Fire, a space for conversations to nurture hearts and build lives following Jesus. We just love thinking more deeply about big ideas and how to apply them.
You're very welcome. That was Sarah. My name is Johnny. We are, what are we? Tired? Confused? We are leaders and friends and podcast participants.
Yeah, we're podcast buddies.
Yeah, no.
Oh, look at that.
We get
That's
to all of
nice.
those things. We get to lead together in our local community in Birmingham, UK. Elim Life Church, whom we love very, very much, and it's our privilege to be a part of that. But you might not be from there, and that's okay.
Yeah, you're welcome
You're
too.
welcome. We like hanging out with you as well. But we are using this moment to talk about some of the things that we are thinking about in community. That is why, if you're brand new, we are 3 seasons in. This is season 3.
Yeah, this is season 3 and this is episode 18.
So we
my
talk a
actual
lot.
days.
Some would say too much. But we are using the podcast as a kind of resource extension. Not everything that we kind of get to in our gathered moments will be covered. And so an ask a long, long time ago from community of like, hey, help us see some of your working out, show some of your notes, work through some of that. And this is the vehicle for that. So you are very, very welcome. This year 2025, we're thinking about walking well. We've defined that lots of other places. So if you don't know what that means, go and watch another one.
Let's go back to the start of season 3.
That we're thinking about Micah, and we really appreciate your contributions to that. You can get in touch, podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk. Sarah, what are we talking about today? What are we thinking about today?
Yeah, so we have been in Micah chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if you have not connected with those, and we did like an introductory podcast on like, how do you even read a minor prophet? Like, what is Micah? What's this all about? How do we even attempt to understand it and apply it? So we've got a few episodes on those. And so today, on this episode, we're going to be looking at chapter 5 in the first half of the episode. And then we're just going to nod to chapter 6 a little bit in the second half of the episode, because for the final one on Micah, we're going to go a bit deeper into 6 and 7.
Indeed.
And it's very confusing. So let me try and just explain kind of like where we are. The way that Micah kind of formats these communications, we kind of are encouraged to think of them as sermon notes or communication notes. The way that they've been put together is kind of like these 3 cycles of things that happen, this pendulum swing, these up and down movements and motions of the communication. And so we're on to the second cycle and a bit of the third. So the second cycle is chapters 3 to 5. Please stay with me, I promise. I promise. And then the third cycle is chapters 6 to 7. So we're going to kind of do a little bit of that, but leave that third cycle really to the next episode. But we wanted to kind of give you a little nod into that. And so Micah is speaking to communities of people. He's speaking to kingdoms. He's speaking to leaders. He's speaking to kind of the whole earth. He's speaking to those who are responsible for religious kind of things. He's speaking to those who are responsible for marketplace and civic and business. Essentially, anyone who's in community at that moment.
Everyone.
He has come. He's a contemporary of Isaiah and who's the other one? Is it Hosea?
You, mate.
Yeah. And he is essentially coming to bring a message from God to the people that for a very, very long time, they have not been following God's ways. He's a God of justice and of mercy. And so now there are consequences to that. And so we've come through some of the navigating the ups and downs of that. And then we get to chapter 5, where it's like the enemy is at the door. The start of this chapter as we receive it is like they're sieging. They're like at the door. The enemy is here. Like, look out, this is coming. And then he goes into this beautiful picture of, hey, the leaders that we've had, the representatives of God who are encouraged to reflect God's nature and character and what that looks like to flourish. They have not done a great job, but it's okay because there's one who's going to come. There's going to be a ruler, a shepherd king who's going to come and lead us. And so that's where we find ourselves in chapter 5. So yeah, let's go. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that, because Bethlehem makes a little appearance here.
It does.
Yeah.
A significant appearance, right?
This might be one of the things that you know about Micah. There are some people, like, you might be aware, doesn't Micah have something to say about maybe Jesus and his birth and Bethlehem? This might be one of those pieces of information that when you're asked, hey, have you heard of Micah? This and 6 verse 8 is probably one of the 2 places that lots of people are aware of, really. But it says this. Let me read verse 2 and then we'll talk about it. But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, Ephrathah, I'm going to say yes,
Commit, yeah.
are only a small village among all the people of Judah, yet a ruler in Israel, whose origins are in the distant past, will come from you on my behalf. So it's essentially, it's like God's voice, isn't it, speaking?
Yep.
Like this is where we've been, this is what you've done, this is what the consequences are, but there is a future hope. And so God is now speaking to the people and saying, from this place, Bethlehem, which geographically, I'm led to believe, is quite sort of insignificant.
Tiny.
Yeah, tiny little sort of dot of a place.
Yeah.
I read something somewhere that was like, it didn't even make it to like the list of significant clans.
Not even
and
written
communities.
down. No.
But in the story of God, Bethlehem is really significant. It is a place that we've been to before.
Yep.
It tells a story of God's activity through people, particularly around this idea of kingly leaders and shepherd leaders, isn't it?
It matters in all the ways, and we are falling over ourselves here to do a good job of bringing clarity to this, because there are so many threads we could pull. We've sort of balled our fist around a few of them, and we're going to try and
we're
bring
not
a
going to
few
do
at the
line
same
by
time.
line, because like we don't think that would necessarily be helpful, but we want to take some of these kind of ideas or themes in each chapter, really.
Yeah, so Bethlehem, as you have said, is partly quoted in Matthew chapter 2, becomes part of the fulfillment of this prophetic picture of what the Messiah, where the Messiah is going to come from. But we'll rock on the seesaw a touch. So we've had really, it's been dark, it's been negative, it's been, the course correction for what's happening. And then this release is given of what hope is going to look like. And yes, we carry consequence, and we carry the awareness of leaders not leading and people just being gross. And so then what's the remedy to that? What's the alternative? Is it going to be like this forever? And God says, no. There is hope. There is deliverance. There is salvation. There is assurance of the future looking different, and
being led in a different way.
Being led in a very different way, and being gathered as community in a different way. All of that good stuff starts to happen here, and there are moments that pertain to specifics. We, again, danced around this a little bit last time, in that we are not drawing the straight lines of the history of these moments, and we're okay with that. We are painting outside of the lines and the artistry of this moment in what that picture is doing for us, and we gain confidence from that by watching others later do the same thing.
Yeah, in Scripture. Right? Because, like you said, it's referencing Matthew, and like others draw this line from Micah to Jesus in Scripture. So it kind of gives us a bit of a confidence that whether Micah realized that or not in the moment of writing it, with that hindsight perspective, we can draw some of those lines out. Yeah.
So structurally, in chapter 5, we get some more lament. We get some more.
Yay, my favourite. Let's be sad about the bad things.
We get some more embodied lament, and there's some striking, pun intended, some striking behaviour in there. It gets to us a little bit because we maybe, perhaps our cultural patterns of grief look different, but we're supposed to be funeral imaging here again. This is lament, this is grief, this is sorrow, this is torment. So we get a bit of that. And then we transition into promise. And then we get some, I've written in my notes, like repeat to remember. And again, we maybe don't get this on first pass. This is maybe part of the point of these longer conversations, and we get a bit of time to do that. But the structure of how the poem is given, poem is written, if you think about repetition as a tool for memory, as a tool for learning, in the structure, we sort of finish where we started. We sort of get this. There's a little bit of a loop created. We get a little bit of repetition.
And repetition of images.
Yes.
So we've got like
yes.
giving birth again in this. We've got flocks and shepherds in this. We've got peace again in this. We've got, like military sort of metaphors, remnants. So each kind of part of Micah unfolding this prophetic word in this way or curating it in this way, you do get these sort of repeating patterns that draw you back into the story of God, which is really helpful, I think. It's such a brilliant tool.
It's great.
To go, oh, didn't I read something about this somewhere? Yes, you did. In Micah, yes, and other places. Oh, great.
Building the layers.
Yeah.
Building the layers, building the layers. So lament, promise, and then some remembering is structurally, if that's your thing, if you're interested in that, that's a little bit of what's happening, and you can kind of chase that down the rabbit hole and see why that's doing that. We also, as in you and I, have thought about the value or not of lifting out maybe some place names, or maybe some of the imagery, or some of the things that are happening there. And we still haven't made up our mind. We're sort of committed to see what comes out as we begin talking about it.
Yeah.
But let's start with Bethlehem.
Yeah, because I think you can read through place names and not realize that they are telling a piece of the story. It's not just, oh, this happened in Cardiff or London or Birmingham. Yeah. To that culture and that context, to those people and their history, those names of people and those names of places were significant.
Yeah.
And were... by just, and this is a tool that you'll see a lot that the prophetic writers use, they will maybe name a place knowing that everyone will go, oh, we know what the history is attached to that.
Great.
Or they will name a person, and you'll see that particularly in like chapter 6 and 7, they'll name a person and they won't unpack the whole story for you, but there will be an awareness or an assumption that you say. So, for example, in this one, it says Nimrod. That the people of God will go, oh, we know the story of Nimrod. We know what the parallels that are being drawn. We know what like Micah is trying to get our attention about in that, or what God is trying to get our attention. Like somebody of military power that God had to rescue and deliver them, you know? And so it can be helpful sometimes. I was reflecting in a conversation that sometimes I found this prophetic kind of communications harder to read because it just reels off names of places or people with no other explanation, because at the time you would have known. And so for us reading it now in the 21st century with perhaps maybe a Western lens that I've got, I have to work a little bit kind of harder at it's really easy just to read it through. It's not that you have to do that to understand it, because I think, you know, the Spirit of God is much bigger and greater than that. But I think for me, I found it really helpful to go, oh, okay, that he's drawing that line. Brilliant. That just, I'm going to use my favorite word, undergirds what he's trying to say there. Come on.
Let's move on from that.
Call back.
Friend
of the show.
With place names too, I don't want people to feel, which this isn't what you were doing, but it's not like Bible code. It's not like, oh, how do you know these secrets? They're not secrets. You just got to study.
They're in there.
They're in there. And what we find as a consequence of that is that these communications are way better than we thought they were. We think
I
they're pretty good.
I was very scared of them.
Yeah, right.
And I didn't understand them. And
it's worth getting into.
It is from someone who... this is probably the first time I've really done this kind of big deep dive on a minor prophet. I think it's probably the first time we've like chapter by chapter gone through it in community.
Okay.
So I think it's been really fascinating from all of those kind of angles, really, to go, oh, there's so much. And Micah, like we plan our communication series about 12 to 18 months in advance. And so we never quite know, like, when we get to them, like what's going to be happening. But there's so many things that are happening in our world currently in 2025 that so much of Micah speaks to as well. So it definitely feels like the Spirit is kind of leading and shaping us in that, which is really exciting.
It's really exciting. So with all of that preamble, Bethlehem.
Yeah, back to Bethlehem.
Back to Bethlehem. I was going to say means, but that's maybe unhelpful. It translates as house of bread. Mm-hmm. Now, you're either having a party because you're already there,
whoop, whoop,
or you're going, what's Hovis got to do with this? I'm confused. I don't know.
Other bread companies available.
A bunch of bakers. I'm not sure why I'm excited about that. So if you remember the Matthew quotation, and then if you get into the Gospels, if we get into the teachings of Jesus, if we get into, and now keep going. Now we get into what do we performatively reenact as communities of faith centered around Jesus, communion. Mm-hmm. Why do we do that? Well, because Jesus told us to, so that's always a good answer to that question. But also we're given this picture of remember me. Remember me. Well, what am I supposed to remember? Well, this is who I am. Well, who are you? I'm the bread of life. And now we go, oh my goodness. And so Matthew uses it as a proof text for like, hey, do you remember since forever, like,
AKA Micah.
yeah, we have been looking to a certain place for a certain type of person. He's here. And he uses
Really
it as
good.
a proof text to be like, no, the fulfillment of these things that our community has been waiting for centuries, these stories that we've been preserving, these things, these glimmers of hope that we've been holding on to, these signposts of where the future is going to come from, and what he's going to look like, and what he's going to be, his I love this word, his countenance, like what's his character and his nature, because the
Nice.
this is a contemporary problem that I think we run into often. We're like, why don't we know what Jesus looked like? Because that's not the point.
Yeah.
Like famously, his appearance was without comment. I mean, just like one of the rest of them.
Just looked like one of the lads.
Yeah, like just, was not, which again is a callback to what were the covenant people of God invited into? Well, it wasn't because they were special.
Yeah.
It's because God is.
Yeah.
And so we get from the beginning of this story, hey, I've chosen you, but it's nothing to do with you. It's to do with me.
Yeah.
And so we pick up these themes and we go, okay, so the myself, the systems and my surroundings are incapable of enacting justice as a representative, as an embodied representative of the character and the nature of God. And so there is the need for salvation to come from outside of those things to deliver. All right, so where's that going to come from? And Micah, in this prophetic moment, says that's going to come from the house of bread.
Yeah.
That's going to come from a place. Now, the things, these systems that have been built up, and any glimmer of where people thought their hope was going to come from has prophetically just been told it's going to be leveled. It's going to be raised with a Z, like you're going to destroy it. And now we're like, oh, brilliant. Well, now what do we do?
Now what do we do? Yeah.
Where's hope coming from? Well, hope's coming from the house of bread, which, by the way, is not significant, is not trendy, is not fun. It's not even written down.
And also, like, in contrast to those who were leading in cities like Jerusalem,
It's all of that.
who were like, just this kind of picture of like, your salvation will not come from these systems or these places that have somehow tried to sustain themselves apart from God. It will come from something that seems so unexpected and small. But isn't that so often the way of God, that we look to the big and the shiny, and God will often draw our attention to those that perhaps we would discount or disregard, and God's like, no, that's part of my kingdom, like that's part of the way that I work, that's part of the way that I operate in the world. And I love that just in this, like, you, O Bethlehem, we get some of that.
And so from the so where's hope coming from? So the people of God are being given, again, we are continuing the tradition of people reading Jesus into this text. Whether Micah knew that or not, who knows? We'll ask him one day. But we are comfortable reading that into the text because others have done that, and that's in Scripture also. And so all of your expectations that have been raised to ruin everything that you thought could save you has been evidence that it has no ability to, in your own corruption, in your own mischief, in your own kind of whatever. And so as all of that has failed, you're going to be left to sit in the consequence of that for a while, until God says, I will bring one from a place that you're not even looking to, who is capable of honouring this partnership agreement. And it will be, I'm adding our projector lens there, it will be your dependence on him that will see new life and see his rule and reign established.
And the link to, I love that, and the link to just the way that God has always been doing this. So Bethlehem being so linked to David, who was seen as like the greatest shepherd king in their history and in their understanding. And so even that sense of like, this is, I've been at this all the time. And Matthew brings out the genealogy. Like this is through it all, in it all, sometimes in spite of it all, like God is at work to bring this restored community, this new way of being through Jesus, through the Messiah, through the shepherd king. These are all sort of images and words that we use. But I love that it says, on my behalf, to pick up on your point.
Where are you? What verse are you in?
On verse 2.
Thank you.
A ruler of Israel whose origins are in a distant past will come from you on my behalf. That, yes, it is for us, but it's because of God and it's for God. So to pick up on your point of like, it's not about us, it is about God.
Yeah.
I think that's really beautiful. And then the other thing about that verse, which I thought was really fascinating when I was reading about it this week, is that the word that Micah uses there, like origins are in the distant past. So this picture of like the big picture of the story of God and how he's always been at work coming to renew and restore and redeem and to make right. In other places in scripture, this word for like origins in the distant past or old or ancient is language that's used to describe God himself. And so I just, as an interesting thought experiment, was like, I wonder, I'd just be reading a few commentators and they were like, I wonder if somewhere just in the back of Micah's mind, was there this glimmer or this glimpse of maybe this new ruler will have an element of God that we've not yet experienced, will be linked powerfully to who God is. Now, we don't know if that's what he intended, but I think that's quite fascinating that all those kind of hundreds of years before, Micah probably would not have been able to have articulated it, but something in the way that the language was captured to point to, hey, this is not going to be just any ordinary ruler. This is not going to be just another David or another king or just, someone who'll do things right. There's going to be something of God about this Messiah, about this ruler, this shepherd king, this person who's going to stand to lead his flocks with the Lord's strength, who's going to help people to live there undisturbed is some of the language. And then it goes on to say he'll be highly honored around the world. It's this global big picture. So I just think that's really fascinating. I don't know.
It's really fascinating. And we see it consistently through prophetic language. It's in Amos. And then we, because this... is it an idiom? Is it a Hebrew idiom? I don't know. I might be stepping outside of
theologians. Let us know.
Qualified to talk about here. But like in essence, the Hebrew version of like long ago, in a galaxy far, far away.
Come on.
It's getting your brain to think about eternity, and where we think about eternity as a future constant. It's both.
Yeah.
And so now I'm thinking about John chapter 1.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking about, because if we are seeing Jesus in this moment, which we should, then that is not just conjecture. I think you very generously put something on the table that I think we should quite quickly pick up. Did he catch a glimpse? Did he as he perhaps understood in his humanity maybe, but like in the supernatural voice of God in this moment. God knows what God's doing. And then people across time have had the ability by the grace of the Spirit of God to recognize that theme and go, this is really important. Like this ties the whole thing together. This is beginning, middle and end. And so John talks about it and Amos talks about it and Micah talks about it and Moses talks about it. And like there is this idea of God who was and is and forever will be, like the nature of the creator existing outside of the creation is a consistent and important theme in our glimpse of God, in our understanding of, and again, for where we are in this moment in time and place, the contrasts of like any small g gods that you have smuggled into, that you've made like economic partnerships with people and the conditions of their partnership were like, I'll just stick an idol here, or just stick a thing here, or
we'll
just do a better there. Like, and it's fine and we'll have enough to kind of keep the economy ticking over and people will keep coming to, the place of worship, but really what they're worshipping is the economy and what they're worshipping is the system that will kind of benefit us and who cares if it squashes them and it's fine. Any of that's been smuggled in are the same people who have been told the story that before there was anything, I am. And they're those people. They carry that story. That's why it's unacceptable.
Because they just either forgotten or chosen not to remember.
Right. So then we throw it in both directions. Let's not go here today, but in our linear concept of time.
Just if you are new to the podcast, we're not going to go down the rabbit hole of what is time, because
let's not do that today.
We would be 3 episodes deep before Johnny took breath. So
let's not do that today. But I think it's
no, that's helpful.
You very generously put it down, and I think we should eagerly pick it up. In that, go and read John 1. Go and go and sniff some of these themes out. Go and pick out some of these ideas. That if this is about big ideas and how to apply them, or what does that mean that God is consistently revealing God's self to be consistent? That will change your day. Because now I'm thinking about, so what then is the variance? Because in the absence of a clear picture of God, I think we teach God as an emotional inconsistent. That depending on how God feels would depend on the weather for the day.
which is not true.
It's not true. And
'Cause
we've
he is unchanging,
misunderstood these pictures of God that God has given
Really good.
to us to understand who God
Yeah.
is. So now where are the variables? What are the variables?
Well, we are.
And why am I bowing
Situations
to
are.
them?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Why am I allowing situational inputs to affect my response to an unchanging God? And the excuse me, and I don't know also, so this is the second part of what I wanted to pick up from what you really helpfully put down. I feel I have too often heard, taught, and told this idea of shepherd king is really codified language for being a bit of a pushover, for being a bit soft, for being a bit like, well, he's not. The shepherd king's not the meanie. Do you know what I mean? The shepherd king is like, oh well, we're just sort of wandering about and it's all right, and he's gonna come here and like calm you down, and then you can go back to doing what you want. That's not the image that's being kind of produced here. Now, I'm also not saying, well, shepherds are ripped and lads.
Some like AI version. We should
right.
put it into
That's-
chat GTPT.
That's not what I'm saying either. I'm not contending for toxic masculinity here. That's not the point that I'm making. But I think we need to be really aware when we venture into these moments that comfort is not the same thing as being affirmed in our nonsense. And so the idea of a shepherd king, of one who gathers and protects and provides, is, and so I'm building the layers here because in first pass, what they've just received is humiliation. And so then what they receive, so again, on my behalf, so to make the point that you're making, will come from you. So we're now re-onboarded into the story. We're not permanently excluded. There's consequence. We're going to have to serve our time out. We're going to have to give our head a wobble and understand what's happened and why it's happened. But then you're re-onboarded. So from you will come, from the house of bread, from the thing that you understand, from you will come one who will lead on my behalf. Now what's happened? There's a shift in those dynamics. You're not king anymore.
Yeah.
God is.
Yeah.
And so from humiliation, from exile, we know these stories.
From self-reliance.
From self-reliance, but out of you, because you're still made in my image, you're still, I'm running too far forward, but as inheritors and co-creators in the story, so you're re-onboarded on the story. But authority is not yours. Authority is mine, says God. So God is the shepherd. He cares, he provides, he nurtures, he protects. King. He's not the shepherd pal. He's not the shepherd
Mate.
hired hand.
Yeah.
Because where we're coming from here is like, oh no, we employ people to do that because I don't want to do that. Like, I'm not interested in that stuff. We outsource those things. And it's like, no. Like, all authority belongs to God. He is the king. He's the shepherd
wise
king.
and unflinching and courageous and
Yep. And so there's this is from a place of humiliation. You're being re-onboarded with one with whom has no equal and is unchanging, so has never had an equal. And so it's not like, oh yeah, we get to have the soft ruler for a little while. No. Like, there is none that can compare. Like, God is God. And I don't know often if we have the presence in these moments to declutter these ideas, because there's so much that gets projected into all of those things, and without sounding like, you know, a concerned parent from the 90s, like an exclamation to surprise contains God in it, you know, like, oh my God, what's happened here? And this is not like moralism in that, but what I'm saying is that it's so compacted, there's so many layers and like connotations and things that are attached to this, which is why I think you and I maybe have stumbled around a little bit deciding which way to approach it, because we're not coming for any of that. This is like, if we don't understand how this tells the story of God, we're really going to struggle with, well, I don't know even how to say that place name, let alone be bothered to understand why we can feel condemned or convicted by, I should read my Bible, but I get to the middle of a minor prophet. I don't know what's going on. I don't know where I am. I don't know who's in trouble. I don't know who's cross or why. I don't know what's figurative. I don't know, like, I've lost the lens to identify sarcasm. So now I'm building pictures of God that were never intended as pictures of God. Do you know what? I'm just going to hop back to somebody else telling me what to think and how to live, and I'm just going to crack on with that, and I'll be fine. that's the problem this is addressing. That's the tension that this is speaking to.
Of not relying on yourself, but on like what God is revealing about who he is.
He
Because
is. Yeah.
there comes, doesn't it, in this chapter, this invitation of like quiet confidence in this great shepherd, that this shepherd king, Jesus, will renew good leadership, like the 7 princes and the 8 princes or whatever it is. I was like, what is that about? But it's about this idea of like
7 rulers and 8 princes.
Yeah,
in verse 5.
when there's when the shepherd king, when the ruler, when Jesus, when the Messiah has established a kingdom that is here and not yet, that with that then comes this sense of, well, because we can trust the shepherd king, then new ways of being can be trusted. Like
Great.
Following Jesus can be trusted.
Yep.
And the way that we lead then can take on the modeling of Jesus, the imitation of Jesus, the nature of this Messiah, this I think one of the commentators said, where the sheep are fed and not fleeced, which I thought was a really cool pun on words.
Very nice.
But it's this sense that this is the nature and character of this new ruler, but of God himself.
Yep.
And that if we can kind of get a hold of that and begin to understand that, how that makes a difference on a wet Wednesday is, well, when everything feels a little bit squirrely and when everything feels like, oh, what's the point? And when perhaps a person in your world is just like being super annoying again, you're like, oh, I feel like I'm just coming around this thing again and again and again, to go, oh, but God is with me. His nature is unchanging. And it goes on in verse 5 to say, and I'd love us to have a conversation about this before we go to the break, because we've had a questioning community to describe this new ruler in terms of peace.
Yep.
And so the question from community is this: can you share your thoughts around peace and God's greatness? Micah 5 verses 4-5 speaks of dwelling securely. What does this look like in today's contemporary culture?
Great. Really good question.
Really good question. I like that.
There are many, many parts to that question. So in the tradition of making this about Jesus, Paul talks about in Ephesians chapter 2. Paul, like he's somebody in community, the Apostle Paul.
Hey, you absolutely roasted me.
I did.
For flippantly introducing the Apostle Paul
my
on
mate Paul.
Previous podcast.
My mate Paul.
I feel like I
Sorry.
just kettle black. There we are.
Yeah,
Go.
there you go. You reap what you sow.
Thanks.
So the Apostle Paul, in his communication to community in Ephesus, is reminding them that what used to divide you now in Jesus unifies you and brings you together. That's really like back of a napkin context for that. And he's talking about some important things that we'll talk about another day. Verse 14, he says, so Ephesians 2:14, for he, so talking about Jesus, is our peace. In his flesh, he has made both groups into one and broken down the dividing wall. That is the hostility between us. He has abolished the law with its commandments and ordinances, that he might create in himself one new humanity in place of the two, thus making peace. He goes on, and that's important. So what do? Well, we make it about Jesus. And the tension then is not in the externalizing of a remedy to speak to a moment, but in the coaching, the teaching of the Spirit in who we now are in Jesus. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that the self, the system, and the surroundings don't save you.
Yep.
He is the source of peace.
Yep.
So peace isn't, although there are beautiful images of the absence of war, that peace is found in Jesus. Like he is the source of peace. He is the man of peace. I also think it's really fascinating because in chapter 3 of Micah, the current leaders speak so flippantly about peace. They're not bothered about like where it comes from, what it is. And then this massive contrast of this Messiah, this new ruler, God himself, as we understand it to be, is like, no, he's going to embody this true peace, this true wholeness, this true integration is found in Jesus because of Jesus.
So let me, in Micah chapter 3, the condemnation is, my paraphrase, like you rulers who declare peace while you've got something to eat, exploiting those who need it and they're starving. So it has been weaponized as something to say, because peace always has an affiliation to hope, right? So we always are hoping for peace. We're always
Yeah.
looking to peace,
Yeah.
the absence of strife, and the fullness of peace, and the idea of rest in our minds and in our souls, in our relationships, in our existence, in the land. In the, like, this is the story, right? From when we choose to turn our back on God, we're now in strife. We're now at a point of tension, and so what we are looking for in our created parts and pieces of us that are not like God yet is desperate for peace, because that's what we're made for. And that's what it looks like for us. So when we acknowledge that we're outside of that, there's tension, we're looking for it. And then in chapter 5, where this imagery is used, I would contend that what we are being given, so the same principle as the Bethlehem thing, like if these are the promises, if this is what it looks like, what are we to expect? So how do we know, what's the almost like the checklist for the Messiah? What are going to be those conditions? How are we going to? Well, he's going to come from the house of bread, and he will not be an agent of war. Like, he just won't be.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not as we are. If we are to use Micah 5 the way that the other biblical contributors have, and then we use that as is he from the right place, and is he of the right stuff? And what that stuff looks like is he will be peace, not able to negotiate better deals, not to improve tariffs, not to like find a way round, not to placate dictators and tyrants, not to flip-flop politically to ensure that the least favorable outcome is sustainable for the most amount of people. He will be peace, and in his presence there will be the absence of strife and of war. So in real life, what does that look like? I am asking the Spirit of God as I become aware of the absence of peace, the lie of violence and war will be, so now walls up, defend, people out, things away, strife, tension, not safe.
Yeah, because the context of the start of 5 is like the enemies are at the gate, like they're here,
it's coming,
mobilized.
It's pressing, it's pressing. And so as we recognize that in us, and we begin to believe I don't have enough, or it's not sufficient, I'm now learning and believing a lie about who God is, because God exists outside of this stuff. So God is never without. That's not the limits of finance. That's just who God is. God is always creating, always expanding, always giving, always, able, capable, all powerful, all knowing. And so there is no lack in God. So the minute I start to believe the lie that I'm without, I'm going to miss out, I'm going to pass by, I'm going to be found to be insufficient in this moment. My boundaries are coming up, my walls are coming up. I'm going to, where it's possible, I'm not a clinician, so don't use this as medical advice. Keep taking your meds. But where I have that awareness in me, I'm going to bring myself to a prayer practice of, Spirit of God, would you give me a bigger and clearer picture of who Jesus is?
Great.
And so I'm going to reestablish my new identity by faith in Jesus through the empowering of the Holy Spirit. And that might look like there's less for me to do. Defending the ramparts is exhausting. Like building the walls up all the time is exhausting. And so if I am led by a shepherd king, my provision is in him, my protection is in him. Now that is an illogical and emotionally naive thing to say. That they are parts of faith that you are going to have to wrestle with. They are parts of ceding control of your life to the shepherd king, and to live like we believe Jesus is not just shepherd but is king. Looks like, God, I don't have a clear enough picture of you to trust you to walk around this bend, because I think I'm going to get my head bitten off. And in spite of what,
or I want to reach for tools that I think I can control instead of reliant dependently on you, because that is the picture here as well, isn't it?
So often, and there's no blame in this, like anxiety is a thing, nervousness is a thing.
And this is the stuff that's worked out in the walking well, like the everyday realities of life. There's always an invitation to come back to God with whatever it is that feels outside of our control, or wherever it is that feels like we are not kind of walking in step with God or in step with the Spirit. There's always that invitation to come back. This picture of the shepherd king is this ongoing shepherd who's shepherding,
and let's use
shepherding
those,
and leading his people.
So let's use those images as we go into the break. Apparently, the kingdom of violence that ends in death looks to establish itself through a city-state and defined by its boundaries.
Yeah,
The
which is
kingdom
kind of
God,
what Nimrod means in that context.
The kingdom of God, apparently, there and then, here and forever. So in this moment, in what Jesus articulates as his kingdom, and then what John of Patmos communicates as kind of some of that stuff, is the redemption of those things where the reign of God is without boundary edge. So the lie then is that the boundary, the barrier, the keeping what I think I don't want out is actually the very thing that's making me separated from peace. The place of peace is without boundary, which is terrifying to us,
because we're humans and we have boundaries,
and we want to control and we want to organize and we want to, but the authority of God is so much bigger than our perception of how we administrate possession.
Yeah, because like later on in that chapter, like Micah names sort of 4 different ways that we try and control. So he talks about self-sufficiency, he talks about military might, talks about occult practices and idol worship.
Yeah.
Again, that's centers of cities and strongholds, the ways in which human beings have tried to mitigate and navigate and protect for themselves and decide what is good for themselves.
Yeah.
And right in the center of this whole chapter is this like looking to the source of peace, looking to Jesus.
Yes, we get double
all
bubble.
of that.
Chapter 5, Micah 5:5. The promise is, and he will be the source of peace. Ephesians 2:14. He is our peace. And so we use those in part as bookends to be like, Spirit of God, will you give me a bigger and clearer picture of Jesus? And will you speak to me about what in myself, the systems of my surroundings are convincing me that that's not true?
Yeah, or that I need as well as. Great. Well, we will be back in a few moments. Go enjoy your brain break, and we're going to kind of kick off and think a little bit about chapter 6 in the rest of this episode.
We've got like 15 minutes. Just
like a little bit.
Just a little touch.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
See you in a bit. Welcome back from the brain break. We are going to jump straight into Micah chapter 6.
That was so fast. My brain was still on the break. I was like, whoa, we're back. We're back.
So to help us do that, I'm just going to read the first 5 verses of Micah 6 from the NLT version. We're going to have a quick conversation about what Micah 6 is and setting it up. And then in our final episode on Micah, we're going to really unpack those famous verses and a little bit of chapter 7. So let me read Micah 6. In the NLT, it's kind of entitled The Lord's Case Against Israel. Listen to what the Lord is saying. Stand up and state your case against me. Let the mountains, there they are again, and hills be called to witness your complaints. And now, O mountains, listen to the Lord's complaint. He has a case against his people. He will bring charges against Israel. O my people, what have I done to you? What have I done to make you tired of me? Answer me. For I brought you out of Egypt and redeemed you from slavery. I sent Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to help you. Don't you remember, my people, how King Balak of Moab tried to have you cursed, and how Balaam, son of Beor, blessed you instead? And remember your journey from Acacia Grove to Gilgal, when I, the Lord, did everything I could to teach you about my faithfulness. Whoo!
Yeah.
Here we are.
Yes.
So we've got mountains, we've got place names, we've got people, we've got stories.
Callbacks.
We've got callbacks galore.
We're back in the courtroom in our mind's eye.
Yeah, like...
It's legal context again.
Yeah, but it's slightly, I think the mood changes a little bit with this one, because God addresses them as like my people. So it comes to like, you know, it feels like it's more personal. Like, what have I done to make you tired of me? Like, God is asking, this is God's voice, isn't it? To the people. Like, what have I done to you that would cause you to behave in the way that you've been behaving, to act in the way? It's not like a list of shortcomings or practices or actions that they've not got right. It's much more like relational language.
Yes.
Again, I read a commentator said God is concerned for the relationship, not the record of wrongs here, which I thought was really interesting. And he's almost saying, like, show me what I've done wrong, and And before they really get a chance to answer, although it seems that their response is to be bored of God, which is bizarre, but that's kind of where they end up. It's this reminder that God's like, but look at how I've been faithful. Look at who I am and what I've done and how I've spoken to you. And again, we spoke in, I can't remember which episode now, but about how names and places tell big stories without going into the details. And I think that's happening a little bit here as well, isn't it?
Yeah, and some of the rhythm, I'm just sort of running around my notes here because some of the rhythm in how that speech is given, because we've already had one of these like square quotes courtroom kind
dramas.
of presentations before.
Let's go.
But this one
Matlock.
This one's set up differently. In that the tone's different. Like it's not,
the
to your
mood's
point,
changed,
it's not a list of accusations. It's more familiar in,
it sounds like a relation. Like, what have I done to you? Do you know what I mean? It sounds like a relationship, doesn't it? Like,
it is that. And it's also, like the presentation, I'm just reading my notes here. Like there's a formula to it, right? It's delivered in a way that people would have recognized what it was, what's happening. Why? Well, again, you've referenced it. We've got mountains again. So where am I? I'm Moses.
Yeah.
And it's Sinai. It's covenant. It's like and it's re-entering all of
it's
that stuff
also creation.
again.
Mountains were like these. Mountains have been forever.
Yes.
So they're going to be witnesses. So they essentially, God's calling on nature, not deifying nature, but calling on nature. Go, you have been a witness to what I've done. Yeah. You've been a witness to all these stories of deliverance from Egypt, and my intervention in these sort of stories of your community, my active participation in your world and in flourishing and in building community and in being given a land. All of that stuff, that like literally the feet, like the ground that you're stood on right now.
Yes. So all of the benefits,
stories.
All the benefits are rattled off.
Yeah.
So all the witnesses have gathered so creation as witness has gathered. Yeah. All the benefits of that have been listed. Now the evidence of and you seem ungrateful.
Yeah, you seem bored with me. You seem as if it's a chore.
Yeah, what's the tension? Like what's going on? Is presented sort of as the case, really, isn't it?
And then it seems that God is wanting to remind, which I think is fascinating, remind people of who he is, faithful, and what he's done, some specifics. So Moses and Miriam and Aaron, like really familiar stories. I've rescued you. I've brought you out of Egypt.
Yep.
And then some of these other stories, like go and read them and find out about them. But essentially like places that we've put our trust in human beings and God's had to deliver or protect or bring blessing through unexpected ways. All of these are pointing to like, this is who God is. This is how he operates. This is how he acts. This is how he is. He is mercy and justice and loving and compassionate, all of these things. And I wonder whether part of his kind of like remember is this ability then to see yourself in the story of God. So as I remember, I find myself in the story of God. I remember the times that God was faithful. Right. I remember the times that God moved in ways that I couldn't have made happen. But also that it doesn't seem as if those memories of who God is and what he's done are enough now to motivate people to follow him. Does that make sense? Yeah. So I think some of that is also like, let me give you an opportunity. This is my words, my inference. Like, this is who I am. This is what I've done. Remember that, because that might bring gratitude or thanksgiving. That memory, that remembrance might help you now to want to participate, might bring you motivation to not be weary, you know, to see me again and remind you again. Because for centuries, they've just chosen not to remember. They've forgotten who God is and how he works. And so it's almost being confronted with this picture of who God is and saying, how are you weary of me? Why are you weary of me? It should be the other way around. God should be like, I'm weary of you. Oh my goodness, come on, get with the program, you know? Right. But it isn't that. And I wonder if part of that is to just maybe remind them, because of what Micah does next with it all, is to remind them, no, you are still part, you have been part of the story of God. And if you're willing, I still want you to be part of the story of God, you know? So
what we wanted to do in these sort of 10 or so minutes, we're not going to talk about the verse the famous bit in this episode. We're going to do that next. But the reason, let's talk about some of the reasons why it doesn't just come straight in. with verse 8. If we're running ahead of the story. I want to then, let's just pick at this setup a little bit more
Yeah.
to help us fully understand the tonic of 8.
Yeah. So I think these first few verses of this passionate plea from God to the people, it's almost like the heart of God on display, isn't it? I mean, that language is so familiar and familial. And so even though it is this courtroom drama, this kind of case that is presented, it comes from a relational perspective from God, I think. And then we move into these famous verses, which is like, so this is what God has asked of us. This is what God has required of us. This is what it looks like to be a human being, a way to be and a thing to do. And then we end up back at the end of like, oh, and also these are some of the ways that you haven't quite got that right. And Micah confronts that again. And then we get into 7 and it's like, again, this big up moment, this hope moment that comes, this confidence based on who God is. But in this one, it's almost like this summons, isn't it? He's asking them to pay attention. He's asking them to hear his voice. And I think it's really interesting as well that it's in a public space, you know, this idea, it's really personal, but it's also public. And I think that's quite interesting.
Really interesting.
Is it that God is saying, look, you can't hide from me, so don't try. Not in a like or rude way, but like I see and I know and remember I've been walking this journey with you a long time. Like I've been the one to intervene when you haven't got it right. I've been the one that when you've been enslaved people, I've rescued you. Like I've been that one, and there's a way that I want you to be that's distinctive and holy that Micah goes on to talk about. But I wonder if there's some of this reminding of that original covenant, that original agreement.
For sure.
And those who God raised up to lead in them. Because again, he picks 3 specific names. I love that there's male and female in there. But again, this picture of like, they were chosen by God and they were commissioned by God and they were empowered by God to lead the people. And that's part of how God works and what he wants for his people and from his people. I don't know. Just kind of thinking out loud.
Good. I think it's worth consideration. I think understanding the case helps you understand the verdict, right?
Yeah, okay, that's good.
We've teased and we're nearly there. The next episode we will cash
Everyone's
in
like,
on all of that.
when will you get to verse 8?
We will.
What does the Lord require of you, O mortal?
We will talk about that. But that belongs somewhere.
Yeah, that's the verdict, isn't it? Yeah.
Lives like that's God being like, okay, so then this is what it is actually is about, because this is again easy. Maybe this is too often my lens and my perspective, but I feel it's maybe too easy to negatively project onto people and go, well, you know, they were daft and should have known better and didn't, and you know, well, we would never do such a thing. But let's just again quickly recap where we have been the last 3-4 hours or whatever we've got to this point. It is the merging of compromise.
Yeah.
It's the belief of anything at this point, anything other than God can save or provide.
Yeah.
It's the muddying of the waters of how we treat the least in community.
Compartmentalizing of life.
Separating out who I am publicly to what I am privately. It's the exploitation and greed as the moral baseline for decision making in community. It is
not representing or embodying God or reflecting him well in any way.
It's allowing our civic institutions to speak on behalf of God and to use the tools of the people of God to achieve their own ends and leave faith community behind. It's faith community soiling its reputation. It's faith community being in active, willing partnership and participation with evil.
Yeah.
It's like these are, I know I keep saying it, but like these are contemporary tensions.
You just don't need to look far across the globe to see some of these conversations that are happening in all sorts of spaces, online, over coffee. You know, how do we put our trust in this system or person that seems to say one thing and do another, or doesn't seem to have integrity or honor? And we see that from small sort of micro local levels right up to kind of governments across the globe, but they're not meant to save us.
No. And their extravagance in our dysfunction can falsely be impressive. And so
Yeah. Okay. Never thought of it like that.
they're not short of the ability to impress. They're not short of the ability to move the needle. They're not short of, that at this point, the sacrifices are an extravagance. They're not sacrifices anymore. They are flagrant displays of their own wealth and power and corruption. And that's
It's back to
impressive.
that veneer idea, isn't it?
Yeah. And so at this point, it's not God saying, listen, if we could just polish the gold and make it a bit shinier, if we could just give a little bit more, if
It's
we
like
could...
complete change from the inside out, isn't it?
It's like, no. This as an idea isn't who I am.
And it's failing you and others.
Yes.
And me.
Yes. And this is what matters to me. I think also often we are quick to recognize the problem and we are slow to action remedy. God apparently would prefer us to be the other way around. He's like, no, all the time, this is what I want you to be like. And not as a special occasion or a festival or a one-off.
So do you think then that the remembering is in order to know and apply?
Yeah.
So it's not just like, hey, remember those stories, but it's more that I think I'd read somewhere like remembrance means participation. So as you remember, you then are invited to become an active participant in the story of God that is unfolding in your life, in your community, in your city, in your day. But to remember allows you then to not just know information, but to know in such a way that it transforms who you are and who you're becoming in order to more become like Jesus, we would say, or more reflect God.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And so...
so then we get to that. This then is how you live.
It's how you do that.
Yeah.
So we're not just condemned. We're not just aware of our failure. We are given the invitation for a new way to be. And at this point, 6 1/4 chapters in, that's not ambiguous. There's no tension around what that's concerning or who that's concerning.
Yeah.
It's to the point we've made earlier on, and so we're in the third cycle here. So chapter 6 is the start of the third cycle.
Good remembering.
Which in the structure of the communication,
We're kind of coming into land.
is important and is bringing kind of these things to a point. And so it's been everyone, it's been leaders, and now we're kind of bringing God's portion. That's maybe not helpful, but like the verdict is coming.
Yeah, and we're hearing much more of God's voice.
Yes.
This is much more God talking to people and asking questions and speaking on his own behalf in that sense.
Technically, it's a dirge, but we won't talk about that today.
That's exciting. Yeah, we haven't got time for that today.
It is. We haven't got time for that today. But we're in the dirge. This is like the concluding salvation prophecy song. That's what's happening in the structure of this moment.
Nice.
So that's important to remember. Again, if you've done this a lot and you're like, yeah, I know, come on, get on with it. Thank you for your grace and patience with us. And if this is brand new information and you're like, I have only ever fought my way through Micah because it was in my reading plan, and I'm like, I lost track with it a long time ago. Hopefully this re-onboards us in the story of God, to be enthused about. We don't often I feel that we can feel the Old Testament as we receive it is like homework. We don't really want to do it, but we know we're supposed to, and you can sort of tell in community who's done their homework and who hasn't done their homework, because that's how you say that. They're helpful, thank you. And it's
just
not
say it fast
that.
and quick, and hopefully it sounds about
Yeah,
right.
right. Just commit. And it's not that. It's not assigned homework that we'd prefer not to do, and we're hoping that nobody will find out we haven't really done our 10,000 hours at the end of it. It's the story of God. It's the story of God. And,
absolutely.
And so it's
and finding ourselves in it is really important.
And it's worth the investment to understand what that means. And so if New Testament writers felt that it was important enough to quote and to reference, if Jesus thought it was important enough to quote and to reference, then it's not just
and that he came to be a fulfillment of these
those things.
Yeah, which he self-discloses. He says that, like, I've come to fulfill these things, you know, and to bring those things to understanding and application and being able to know him in it. Is there anything else we wanted to say on that before I kind of lead us off into prayer? I just conscious that we've talked a lot about chapter 5, just a little bit about 6 on this one. But I just was really fascinated by that idea of remembrance, and so I'm going to lead us in a prayer around that. And what does it look like to remember who God is and remember who you are in God, particularly around that idea of peace and faithfulness? So maybe you just want to sit quietly if you can as you listen to this or watching this, or perhaps you want to just like pause for a minute if you're able to do that. But just think about God. Just think about how you have seen God at work in your life. Remember, like literally remember. Remember perhaps stories from scripture that have really spoken to you in those moments where you've needed encouragement or help or strength. Maybe remember the ways in which you've seen God at work in your life. It could be in something that feels insignificant or small. It could be in something that feels really, really big. But actually just take a moment to remember, what's the thing that kind of rises to the surface? What's that thing that the Spirit wants to remind you of about who God is and how he's at work in the world, but also in your life? And then I wonder if you would just come to that place of asking him for that bigger picture of who he is that Johnny was talking about earlier. Jesus, we thank you that you are our peace. We thank you that you are merciful and compassionate, full of unfailing love towards us. Spirit of God, would you help us to remember who you are, what you've done, what you're doing in our lives, not simply for head knowledge, but that it stirs our faith for the present moment and for our hope for the future. Jesus, we always pray. We can never exhaust who you are. You are limitless, and we want to know you more. And so, Jesus, would you, in your kindness, would you help us to have a bigger picture of who you are? Would you help us to make sure that we keep coming back to finding ourselves in you and in your peace for your glory? Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for being with us. Well done. You made it. If you're just watching, can you subscribe and do all that fun stuff so you don't miss anything? And if you're just listening, you can watch now too.
Yay.
So share that with somebody. If you have found something in there that sparked a thought or an idea or something that would be really helpful for the rest of the podcast community to know, could you send us an email? That would be really, really helpful. podcast@elimlifechurch.co.uk. And we'd love to find better ways to kind of gather that digital community online, share that with each other, get your questions in. We've had a brilliant question in this episode, and we've got another one in the next one.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah, we're scheduled
no,
for
in the
that.
guest one.
Uh-oh.
Look out. Hey,
I'm overcommitted.
it's coming.
So we need questions is what I'm trying to say. Thank you so much, and we will speak to you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.